this is that I have a collection of Purdue Exponents and the entire collection of debris. But I find it fascinating to go through these things to actually get an insight into how students lived, what was important to them, because if it wasn't important to them, it wasn't going to show up in their publications, and really insights into the culture of the university back in the 1880s all the way up to current day. And I'd like to share a little bit of that with you today, kind of going through this history. So the thing is, back in the 1870s, Purdue, or not Purdue, but student newspapers started to appear on campuses all over the world. And you had, for example, the Harvard Crimson was established in 1873, the Yale News, which both of these are still in print today, 1878. At Columbia, University of Columbia, the Spectator started in 1877, and the Cornell Daily Sun started in 1880. And at Purdue, well, not so much, okay? We didn't really have a whole lot at that particular point as far as an official publication. But Purdue really wished to emulate the Ivy League schools, and when you'll hear references and see references in some of the early writings about comparing Purdue to Ivy League schools and basically saying it's an Ivy League school except without all the Ivy. So it's they tried to kind of do that, and so literary societies sprung up on campus, mostly driven by the students, but also by the faculty. And each of these literary societies, for example, there was the Emersonian Literary Society, the Philalethian Literary Society, the Irving Literary Society, and there was the Carlisle Literary Society. So these were very prominent organizations on campus, highly attended by students. And each literary society had its own publication, means to be able to get things out that staff or faculty or students would write on this. And what happened is that because each of these societies had their own little kind of small publication they would do, they kind of merged into 2 monthly publications on campus that began in the 1880s, and they served as outlets for student and faculty to write. Now, you were considered, quote unquote, sophisticated if you were published. Therefore, it was, students were highly motivated to actually publish in these publications, these 2 monthly publications. And here's one of them. One of the publications was called The Purdue. And as you can see by the front cover of this particular index, it was quite involved. There's homage over here, you see, to the Irving, Philalethian, and the Carlisle literary societies. There's homage to the art down here. And this was really designed to be the art and literature publication on campus, capturing the best and the finest of what Purdue University students and faculty had to offer. But by 1885, this magazine had started to evolve, and not only was it art and literature, but it was starting to include science, mechanical, and local news as illustrated by the contents in this 1885. Now, apparently, there was some internal jockeying between the arts and literature side and the science mechanics side with it. Because as we see this cover in March of 1885, it's very much what you would expect out of an engineering science school, very clean cut lines, etc. Versus a few months later in December of 1885, the cover looked like this. So again, the art side got control of the front cover with it and changed back and forth. So I think what we can kind of read between the lines is with this publication, there was probably a little tension between these kind of diametrically opposed poles on the campus. The Purdue itself was a pretty prominent newspaper, a magazine with it, and you notice it attracted some pretty good talent. Now, Effie Lutz over here was actually one of our locals. She was part of the Lutz family out of Shadeland here in Tippecanoe County. But there's a name that you recognize also, Mr. George Ade. And remember that he was the man on campus. He was the big man on campus. George was the one who everybody kind of, all the gentlemen on campus looked up to as kind of aspiring to, versus they all felt like hayseeds compared to the very sophisticated George Ade. And that is another name down here that many of you will recognize, Henry Vinton. Yes, that is the Henry Vinton, Henry Heath Vinton of Vinton Woods, Vinton Subdivision, Vinton Highlands, because the Vinton farm used to be out there. And Henry Vinton went on to become a very prominent Superior Court judge in Tippecanoe County, and is really cited as being really one of the foremost individuals in our county during that time. So they all got started with these publications and literary society publications. In 1889, however, things started to change. And the Purdue and the magazine, the Purdue, and another campus publication came together to form a monthly magazine called the Purdue Exponent. And you see one of the editions here. Now, the new magazine attracted some interesting talent, names of people who kind of went on to bigger things. For example, John T. McCutcheon, who went on to get a Pulitzer Prize for for cartooning and political cartoons. He was known as the Dean of American Illustrators. And this is John T. McCutcheon right here, along with his best friend, Mr. George Ade. The two of them actually went to Chicago. Actually, John T. McCutcheon got George Ade's first job in the newspaper gig and really started off his career there. They both worked for the Chicago Record. But John was one of the helped launch the Purdue Exponent. By 1889, George Ade had graduated, but he was still in the community. So we actually helped have input into it also. Now, another name not as familiar to many of you is Albert Bruce Rogers. Yet Bruce Rogers had quite an impact and is known internationally in certain circles. And you see that this cover that we have here on the Purdue Exponent, if you look down at the bottom, there's Bruce Rogers' name. Now, Bruce Rogers, let me tell you a little bit about him, because he's kind of one of these people who has a history at Purdue University, had an influence in the world, but it's not really that well known. Bruce Rogers, or sometimes he went by Bert or Bruce or just BR, okay, he never went by Albert, which was his first name. He was born in Linwood neighborhood, right here in Lafayette, and he attended Purdue University. And as you can tell, he was a bit of a detailed doodler. You can see that kind of illustrated by what this looks like, something that you or I might do if we're really bored sitting in a classroom, basically just doodling things on paper with that. But he described himself as a detailed doodler, but what he did is he leveraged that talent into drawings that were very characteristically very intricate and very much reflected nature and the natural curves found in nature. And you see a couple of examples here from the 1891 Purdue debris that were drawn by Bruce Rogers. And he carried this forward into a career in typography, okay, typography, excuse me. Got to put the right emphasis on the correct syllable. So essentially he was a typographer, and one of the new one kind of in an emerging area. Remember, books used to be printed in smaller amounts, and a lot of art went into them. Well, he leveraged on that and created some of the most wonderful books that are still in circulation. In fact, if you find a book that was created by Bruce Rogers, you can probably bet it's going to command a very high price, because they're very sought out for the artistic construction that he added to that. So he's actually claimed as among the greatest book designers of the 20th century. He's a Purdue alum, and associated with his art is found throughout the debris and the Purdue Exponent. This is just another example of it, and there's his little characteristic monogram there, the ABR, that indicates that he, again, using this natural theme, all his drawings kind of reflect the natural curves that you see, very curving, very few straight lines in his work. How we see him today, he is the one who created the Centaur font, which is on all your computers right now. So that font was created by Bruce Rogers, and it's kind of a lasting legacy even into the 21st century. Now, the Exponent at that point was a semi-monthly paper, okay, from 1889 all the way up through 1906. It was a monthly paper, so it was a fairly thick paper. But then it began to run daily for about 90 years, from 1906 to 2016. And again, reflected what was going on campus. By having the daily publication, it allowed them to capture what was important. Now, I pulled this one up. This is a series of collections of newspapers I have from the 40s. And I think the title kind of tells us a little something here. It tells us a little bit of insight. For one thing, it says, Dave Garroway agrees to select the 1949 debris queen. There was not a homecoming queen. The debris was actually designated, if you will, as appointing the queen. It wasn't homecoming, it was the debris queen as opposed to the homecoming queen. And on top of that, who's this Dave Garroway guy? Does that ring a bell with anybody? Anybody know Dave Garroway here? Remember the name?
Today Show.
Exactly right. Dave Garroway was the first host of the Today Show that continues on still on NBC. But before he was famous on the Today Show as the person who started that, he was a prominent DJ, a nationally known DJ on WMAQ in Chicago. And he was very, very, very popular with all the students. And so he was actually brought down from Chicago to select the 1949 Debris Queen. And there's Dave Garroway right there with the Queen and her court. And you may recognize his face again from some of the advertisements you've seen on the early Today Show. So that kind of gives you an insight with that. Now, this is kind of interesting. In 2017, the Purdue then, the Exponent, went to 2 times weekly and relied more and more on the web edition, which, of course, we're seeing the same thing happening in all modern publications of newspapers today. But Purdue still has the distinction of being one of only 2 college newspapers that owns its own presses and has owned them for a number of years. So the Exponent captured campus life. And campus life at Purdue University, as you look through these newspapers, is very interesting. For example, Duke Ellington, whose name you should recognize, accepts for the Carey Club formal on January 14th. The Carey Club formal dance had Duke Ellington and his orchestra. And that's pretty amazing considering how popular Duke Ellington was back in the 40s through that period of time. But Duke Ellington came to the Carey Quad formal dance and basically played for him. Pretty awesome with that. Disney, we're talking the Disney, Walt Disney, came to campus in 1949 along with the stars of a new Disney production called So Dear to My Heart. And he actually did the premiere of this movie on Purdue's campus in 1949. And Walt Disney himself attended the opening premiere along with all the stars. Now, why was that? Well, part of it was because the story is based on a Hoosier family. But the other part is probably due to Al Stewart. Al Stewart, who was in charge of our bands and choral activities, our music organization at that time, had connections to a lot of these entertainers. He knew people personally, such as Duke Ellington, Cab Calloway, etc., and many of the people who were movers and shakers in Hollywood. So you can probably bet that Al Stewart had a hand in actually inviting Walt Disney to come to Purdue University, a college in the middle of the cornfields of Indiana, to actually open the premiere for his particular movie. So that's pretty cool. In fact, Fantasia, remember that one from Walt Disney also? One of the first showings of Fantasia was actually also done on Purdue's campus. So it's kind of interesting. Purdue was actually kind of a hot spot for a lot of things that came through here. There were debates that came through. Here, for example, Sinclair Lewis had a debate in 1940s talking about the age of machines and so forth. There were a lot of notables that would stop at Purdue University to actually spend time on campus. Showboat was one of the premier musicals of the day. And again, probably under the influence of Al Stewart, it was brought to campus for the students to experience it. Hoagy Carmichael came by, and it was kind of interesting. He made a comment that you see in the title there. Hoagy Carmichael contrasts music hall to horse palaces, and the comment below is that Hoagy Carmichael said that for the first time in his tour began, he felt very much at ease last night on the Purdue University Music Hall stage. What a contrast to the horse palaces I typically play is what his quote was. So again, Hoagy Carmichael came on campus also. Now, I stuck this one in here just for my personal reasons. Many of you know that, again, I'm an emeritus from the veterinary school, and I thought this was interesting. In 1948, the trustees proposed a veterinary medicine school. Well, knowing how government wheels move slowly, it wasn't until 1957 that we actually broke ground for a veterinary college. So anyway, I thought that was kind of interesting there. I had to kind of pull that out for myself. But the campus really captured campus life. Now, again, these are 1940s newspapers that I just pulled out as a sampling. Of course, World War II is very prominent in everybody's lives, along with rationing and all the things that surrounded World War II. And it was no different with the Purdue Exponent. Although the Purdue Exponent tended to distill information from World War II, and what you saw was really not so much about World War II, but the impact of the war on campus events and campus life. Prominently on every front page of almost every Exponent edition, you would find information about Purdue alumni or fellow students who had gone off to war and what they were doing. Hearing something about their citations, about finishing some particular training school, about being positioned in a particular, stationed in a particular country or something like that. But at the same time, you also heard about the dark side of it, and that was a listing of individuals who also were Purdue students, Purdue alumni, who were lost during World War II. So this is one way in which reality really shaped, the Exponent shaped and reflected reality of what was going on in the world around them. And sometimes the Exponent would let information slip a little, like this headline: Navy authorities say the polio cases are improving. Now, I'm certain this is probably not something that everybody in the Purdue administration really wanted to disseminate widely to the campus and get people quite concerned. But there were actually 3 cases of polio or infantile paralysis in the Navy barracks during 1945. They all recovered. I think one had lingering problems with that. But this was something that the Purdue Exponent kind of threw right on the front page with that, which is probably not something that the administration necessarily wanted to widely broadcast. And the Exponent sometimes provided ironic foreshadowing. For example, this headline here: Trapp family singers to appear at the Hall of Music Sunday, 3 p.m. Anybody know who the Trapp family singers were?
Sound of Music.
Sound of Music.
Exactly right. Exactly right. The Sound of Music. But at this time in 1945, this was only just another folk group that was traveling through the country trying to make their way, basically make some income. They were led by the Baroness Maria von Trapp. And of course, they had made their escape from Austria as per the Sound of Music with some literary license with that. And they were here at Purdue University. So again, a little foreshadowing there. They were just another folk troupe coming through here that obviously in the 60s, early 60s, rose to fame and recognition under the Sound of Music. Here's another article. There's this guy named Arthur Hansen, and he was a private, and he ended up on the front page of the Exponent as having won the first place in the intramural forensic contest. Woohoo, go Arthur. Anybody know who this guy is?
Former president.
Hansen.
Exactly, the 8th president of Purdue University, Arthur G. Hansen. It's the same guy. Of course, he went to Georgia Tech in between times with that, did a few other things with that, but he came back. A little foreshadowing there that in 1945, we singled him out. He happened to be on the Exponent, only to come back as a president later on. So some interesting things you find. Oh yeah, the Exponent allowed anyone to advertise. And as you can read here, pretty much, this is a advertisement purchased by the Bloomington, Indiana Herald, okay? And so it's not very complimentary. Apparently we lost 40-0, IU 40, Cal College 0, okay? But the Exponent will basically allow advertising from anybody. But everyday events were captured, and they provided us with an insight as to what the priorities were of the student body. For example, when the sweet shop acquired a new jukebox, this was front page news, okay? So essentially, this was the kind of thing they included, even the things that were on it. The shop manager listed that Margie and Paper Doll were the most played records on the jukebox. So this was big news, okay? This was big news. And again, gives us a little insight as to what student priorities were and what they thought were important. It's interesting, as I mentioned, that until the 1960s, the Exponent tended to confine its coverage of events mostly to campus events, or if they did talk about external events, only their impact. For example, looking again at these 1940s papers, we see that the Victory in Europe, or VE Day, was not the huge headlines that we saw in other newspapers, but VE Day program awaits official confirmation. That was the headline in Purdue University's Exponent, again, talking about taking a worldwide event and translating it into something that the students could how it impacted student life. And it was the same thing with VJ Day, Victory over Japan, that again, the big news was Potter plans VJ Convo for Monday morning. That was kind of the big event. What I find interesting is this other headline that's right over here. It says, University helps develop the bomb. And if you read down through here, it says, following the approval or release of limited information by the War Department, Stanley Merkel of the Purdue Research Foundation today announced that the university's important connection to the development of the atomic bomb that is now blasting Japan. And so it goes on to talk about there were 36 individuals, 36 scientists were either part of Purdue University faculty or trained by Purdue University faculty that contributed to development of the atomic bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Interesting. Something I did not know about, and I thought that'd be kind of another interesting thing to kind of research. And that is, for those of you doing research, and John, you know this, and David, you know this, that is the hard part about reading these things, is as you read information, you find that there's something interesting that leads you down a different route. Must be 12 o'clock somewhere, okay. All right, But of course, again, as we talked about, reality did intrude on student life. And this is a cartoon or a political drawing that's out of the Exponent. It basically talks about how we carved not a line, we raised not a stone, but we left him alone with his glory. Very poignant as far as the losses that not only the university, but the nations suffered with World War II. By the late 60s, with student unrest breaking out in many of the US campuses, we noticed that all newspapers tended to take on a role of being critical of the administration. And Purdue was no different, although probably a little less radical than places like Berkeley. But again, they started to print columns that were not exactly favorable to the administration. Well, at that time, the Exponent was considered to be part of Purdue University and kind of under university control. Always, that was a little bit of debate as to how much influence the administration should actually have on what was printed. But with this kind of trend towards critical comments towards the administration, eventually it reached a point where the university ordered the removal of the editor, William Smoot, in 1968. The Exponent editors refused to comply or to shut down the press, and they put out a special edition called We Will Still Publish, which of course with the peace sign there was basically designed to kind of fly in the face of the administration. Well, this got bad enough that actually a commission was appointed and eventually reviewed the events leading up to William Smoot's dismissal. And William Smoot was reinstated on a technicality that basically the commission decided that the appropriate procedures had not been done to relieve him of being the editor, and therefore he was reinstated. But really, this was a turning point between Purdue University and the Exponent, where they started to go their separate ways. The same commission went on to recommend that the Exponent actually separate from Purdue and become a separate not-for-profit organization. It was free to still use room B50 in the basement of PMU, the Memorial Union, which they had since '33, but they would have to pay rent now. At that time, the Exponent was now you paid for it to actually get a subscription to it or paid for the paper itself, but they would have to use that to actually pay rent to the university to remain in B50. But Purdue, in their agreement, also agreed to help purchase 1,200 editions of the paper to actually support the operations in there. It was not until Arthur G. Hansen in the 70s basically provided some additional support that allowed the Exponent to publish and disseminate its issues for free again. But anyway, it's kind of interesting. It went that way. And of course, the Exponent actually moved out of the basement of PMU and had their own building in 1989, 100 years after the first edition was published. We have a few interesting alumni of the Purdue Exponent who worked on the Exponent, some of whom you wouldn't think would actually do it. But Earl Butts was a member of the Purdue alumni of the Exponent staff at one point. Of course, he was our U.S. Secretary of Ag and very strong in Indiana agriculture as well. Mark O'Hare, who is now currently an illustrator cartoonist with Citizen Dog as his franchise strip that appears in many newspapers across the U.S. And he was a alumnus of the association, but he his greatest contribution was that he's an animator for SquarePants. But what the heck is that?
SpongeBob.
Thank you, SpongeBob SquarePants. Thank you, Dave. I didn't grow up on that. My kids did, so you know it's not quite as ingrained. But yeah, Orville Redenbacher. Yes, the Orville Redenbacher was also on the Purdue Exponent staff. Another gentleman who, if you were here on campus, you saw his works by the name of Bob Peterson. He drew the Locomotives cartoon strip in the Exponent from '85 to '87 and actually did an anthology magazine that you see here, which if you can find it, buy it. Because the last time I saw it went on eBay, and that was a couple of years ago, for 135 bucks plus, okay? Now, why would Bob Peterson have so much interest that people would be willing to purchase his anthology for that outrageous amount of money? Well, part of it is that after Bob Peterson graduated successfully from Purdue University, he went to work for a little company, animation company called Pixar. And in there, he got his feet wet by actually being an animator on Toy Story. He stayed with Pixar, went on to actually move up through the ranks, and he was the co-director for the animated movie Up. Remember that one? And on top of that, he also got to play the voice of the dog, Doug, okay, on that. Well, Peterson still is with Pixar, and he's gone on to greater fame. For example, in Finding Nemo, he played the voice character of Mr. Ray, okay? And then he hit the pinnacle of his career in Monsters, Inc. Anybody know which voice character he was in Monsters, Inc.? Want to take a guess? Remember, we had Mike Wazowski, and we had Silly Sullivan. No, those were bit players. He was the voice of Roz. Okay, that gravelly voice, and basically, you remember that? Okay, that was Bob Peterson. Okay, the pinnacle of his career. So again, and a Purdue alumnus and a member of the Purdue Exponent. So the Purdue Exponent has launched a number of careers in kind of widely diverse ways with that, and people have them on their resume. The Purdue Debris, the yearbook, launched in the same year as the first year of the Exponent in 1889, and the name Debris was meant to mean, quote, a collection of things. Well, if you read John T. McCutcheon's autobiography, he talks about a little different interpretation. He said they selected the word debris because it sounded sophisticated. It is the debris, you know, it sounds like French. So, you know, so he thought it sounded sophisticated, and since he was on the editorial board, he voted to actually include the name Debris. This is the first editorial board of the Debris, and again, number of notables. John T. McCutcheon, again, is located on the left side, on the right side there, was part of the board of editors. In fact, of course, he was interested not so much in writing, but in actually illustrating, cartooning. And remember that, again, in this period of time, photographs in books were expensive. And so you didn't have a lot of photography. You relied on graphic illustrations. And that happened to be what John T. McCutcheon's interest was in. In fact, this board of editors that you see over here actually has JTM listed down there. He drew that as part of the Debris. So John T. McCutcheon and the gentleman we mentioned previously, Bruce Rogers, the typologist, contributed heavily to the art and cartoons of the Debris because, again, photos were so rare. This, for example, is the proposed mechanical building that we would call the Hevelin Hall, the original Hevelin Hall, named after Amos Hevelin. And this was a sketch that Bruce McCutcheon drew, and there's his moniker right there, Albert Bruce McCutcheon. He also did, again, kind of like referencing the previous thing we talked about, Bruce McCutcheon, he decorated parts of the Debris with, again, these floral artistic designs that always reflected nature. And this was something he carried through in his entire career as a typographer and creator of books. Again, just another example of that. And you see his initials there. With it, again, even the Debris. Notice the intricacy, you know, a lot of intricacy in these things. And again, his initials down here indicating that Albert Bruce Rogers was the artist with that. John McCutcheon, very different style. And even back when he was drawing for the Debris, you could tell that, again, he graduated in 1889, but he continued to contribute to the Debris for a number of years after he had taken a job in Chicago. And this is an example from the Debris 91, where, again, he always had a message behind his illustrations, his cartoons and illustrations. As you see here, again, he's got showing different types of things that kind of went into the Debris with that. He always had a message behind what he drew. That was his style. Of course, this is a great picture that shows typical life, you know, on campus at Purdue University. And even a little bit more involved with it as his artistic ability kind of transformed and evolved with that. Again, but there's so many little details in this picture that you look at. For example, the photograph or the picture graphic of the man and woman dancing here, he's stepping on her foot. Okay, so little things like that that John T. McCutcheon incorporated into his illustrations are found throughout the Debris and the Exponent, where he contributed to illustrations. But in addition to the artists McCutcheon and Rogers, there's another name found in the Debris that we never really associate with illustrations. Now here's the drawing by this person, and it's a little more crude than what you saw with John T. McCutcheon's characters. It didn't have the elaborate nature of what Bruce Rogers did and so forth. Well, this person did okay. He was really kind of interested in dabbling in illustration, but his real love was writing. See the name down there? Recognize that? Tarkington, does that ring a bell? Yeah, this is the Tarkington. This is Booth Tarkington, Newton Booth Tarkington. One of only 4 Pulitzer Prize winners in fiction to win the award twice, including William Faulkner, John Updike, and the more contemporary author Colson Whitehead. Booth Tarkington was the only fourth member of that exclusive club who had won the Pulitzer Prize twice for fiction with that. And he was at Purdue for 2 years. He actually came from a fairly well-to-do family who had fallen on rough times with the business downturn in 1873. But his mother really wanted him to go to an Ivy League school on the East Coast. And so by the time, after the spring of 1892, by the fall of 1892, the family had recovered enough financially that he was promptly sent off to another P university, Princeton, where he actually graduated from Princeton University. But we had him for 2 years at Purdue University, and we still claim him as one of our top 10 authors in the state of Indiana. Now, Booth Tarkington was a member of Sigma Chi, and actually you see on his signature the symbols, the Greek symbols for Sigma Chi right down here, which was the same fraternity to which John T. McCutcheon and George A. both belonged. And of course, Tarkington Hall at Purdue University is named for Booth Tarkington. So unlike the dull brown cover of the 1889 premiere edition of the debris, the 1990 debris came in 3 colors. And this is out of my personal collection where I've got 3 of these with that. I do not know the story behind the reason for the different colors with that. Maybe somebody else does. But I've not been able to uncover a true tale as to why there were 3 different colors. But they also produced a 15-year souvenir edition celebrating 15 years since the first graduate. Again, John Bradford Harper graduated in 1875. And so the souvenir was produced the same year to actually celebrate that 15-year anniversary of Purdue's first graduation. Now, over the next several years, the debris experimented with covers and getting kind of creative. For example, they tried wood planking. This is the 1906 debris, and that is literally a slab of wood that is the cover. It held up pretty well, but they shifted over in the next year to what I would call really cheap leather. Now you see this debris that is listed on the screen here? This is not out of my personal collection. This is out of the Purdue archives. And this was probably the best example they could find. See how ratty it is, moth-eaten? The leather on that, I've had other 1907 debris, and they're just roached. I mean, basically the covers are off, the leather has deteriorated with that. So cheap leather was the day of 1907, which is why you don't find very many 1907 debris in very good shape. But then the year after that, 1909 and 1910, they went to this brushed suede, okay? Very, very sophisticated. In fact, if you find older debris, the 1910 is very popular because it actually is in very good condition. It was well put together, and so I've got a number of those 1910s just because you can find them. But then finally they went on to embossed leather that you see in 1919, and by 1920 they went to what we would call the standard yearbook appearance to that, which was the portrait versus the landscape appearance to it, and again, just a leather cover. Last edition of Debris was published for the 2007-2008 school year. And just like almost every other yearbook, succumbed to the twofold things. One, it was becoming very expensive to publish these yearbooks. And secondly, students weren't buying them. They simply weren't buying them. And so even though in 2003, the editor at that time predicted that they may not even be able to get a edition of the Debris put out in 2003, they managed to get together for another 4 years and finally closed the doors on 2008. Now the thing is that I mentioned the debris, I mentioned the exponent, but there were other ways by which students communicated, and there were a wide variety of other communications, publications that were put out. For example, the Purdue Independent was put out in the 1930s to actually connect the off-campus students through some sort of publication. But as you would expect, with students being students, it didn't take long for parodies of the Purdue Exponent to come out. Now, for example, this one is from 1925. This says the Purdue Exponent on there, but it was produced in the Memorial Gymnasium, December 12th, 1925. And it talks about such wonderful things as the blowgun battle that occurred on Stewart Field, the football field there, thrills the natives with that. So again, a parody on Purdue University. Well, they went on and we saw different iterations. For example, the Purdue Exposer came out. You know, a couple of those with that. This one's 1938. Okay, students being students, you know, would basically use these publications to poke fun at the administration, at each other, at their faculty, etc. Now, here was the Purdue Sexponent. Okay, this was a short-lived publication. In fact, I've only seen one of these. There may have been more with that, but basically, again, taking a twist on a theme. And then you got to the more subversive ones. This one was Balls, B-A-U-L-S. We see a picture of President Hovde and the Board of Trustees below on the treadmill there. And this was part of the Purdue, 100 years of tradition unhampered by progress, okay? It was, if you notice the writing here, this is part of the Underground Press Syndicate and the Liberation News Service. So again, this was Purdue's attempt at a, if you will, subversive newspaper, okay, for what it was worth. They did other parodies. For example, Life magazine, there was a parody done with that where Al Stewart made the cover of this particular Purdue parody. Or Like, okay. And of course there was Tame, the weekly publication, which of course is spelled W-E-A-K-L-Y, the weekly news magazine, a parody. And then this one that I found that I have in my collection is called The Responsible Screw. And I couldn't find much information out of it, but I have a hint where it may have come from, because if you look at this editors right here, the first one listed is William Smoot, who was the editor who was relieved of his duties, or attempted to be relieved of his duties, from the Purdue administration at the Exponent. So I don't have a lot of information on that, but it's an interesting, again, another parody on that. And then there was the Limp Rivet, which was shortened to just Rivet. And this is a premiere edition here in 1946 I have in my collection. And it was geared mostly towards the idea for the engineering students. So again, male dominant with that, and all the things that you would associate with a male dominant publication of the 1940s, all the way through the end of the 1950s. This publication continued on as the Rivet. A little bit racy, okay? So the thing is that Purdue University, we don't often realize how much of a long history that Purdue has had as far as publications of various points that actually give great insight. And if you really want to understand what students were thinking about as far as what was important to them or what sort of things were going on campus, this is a great way to do it. Now the thing is, as I've found, and again, anybody who's done research using newspapers has found, is you have to kind of understand the context in which these things were written. Phrases are commonly used at Purdue University or in these publications to actually talk about the sort of things where phrases that we never used were just commonly sprinkled out through these things and had very good meaning to the students on campus. But to us, looking back on it 30, 40, 50, 60, 80 years later, we have no idea what they're talking about. Or the issues that came forward, like the Great Mustache Debate. Okay, what was that about? Or the, what was the other thing that I was reading about? Oh yeah, the intolerance of getting your hair cut back in the 1950s. Apparently the barbershops were raising the price of haircuts by 25 cents. And this was just a calamity. So it's kind of interesting. Other things that have come up, for example, there's the 1974 Purdue University debris, which was a little bit controversial with the hammer and sickle on the front of it. Raised quite a few hackles. But again, if you look on the inside, it's kind of interesting. It says that Purdue University is a land-grant institution founded on mechanics, the sickle, or agriculture, the sickle, and the hammer, mechanics. That's how they explained it. But then if you look down below, it has a phrase there that says, the state won, the people 273. I'm not certain what that means. I never have figured that out looking at it. But again, the debris was a little bit controversial for that particular year. The Exponent itself has gone through a number of ways of looking at things, again, with a variety of covers, various themes with it. Again, kind of from the traditional, the Purdue Exponent Christmas themes, to the much more formal, again, very artistic type sort of views that you see with this. So again, they're constantly evolved and constantly, again, driven by student perception with that. And so again, if you want to have an interesting way of actually looking to see, get inside students' heads, this is a great way to do it. So again, thank you for all attending, and thank you for listening to that. Are there any questions I could entertain or any comments from anybody?
I've got a question, if you know.
Sure, Virginia.
You know, we've been going through old Exponents here too, and seeing you showed a couple of covers that the Exponent covered news from the debris pretty frequently. Mm-hmm. Was there some sort of connection that you're aware of that you've been able to suss out? Or is it just they were a writing group and they, you know, did both kind of things? What do you think?
In the early years, there was definitely a kind of a collaboration, only because they used many of the same people for their illustrations and their writings for the two of them. And I would expect that, again, really the monthly magazine provided good fodder to actually be incorporated in the debris that came out just annually. So there was a connection there. I'm not aware of any formal connection that's been later on with that. John or David Hovde, are you aware of anything? John, you're muted. If you click on that little microphone down your lower.
There I go. I've lost video, but I can hear everybody.
Okay.
I can hear you. I thought it was a great presentation. I don't know of any official connection between the two. But the exponent, the debris is really an excellent source of Purdue history. If you go through them, you can learn all kinds of things about what was going on at Purdue at the time. And they included histories of the university as it went along. So, people would have been interested in somebody once said, that the newspaper people, they just steal from each other all the time. So, somebody writes a good story. There I go. Somebody writes a good story, then somebody else picks it up and copies it, And every 5-6 years, we pull those stories out and redo them. So I imagine that was going on quite a bit, that one had something good and the other one would pick it up and go with it, and they would go back and forth like that.
I really like when I used to go through both the Exponent and the Debris, looking at the cartoons, because they really reflect, what was going on campus from a student perspective, and a lot of them have very interesting little things in them that I think you had to be a student to catch it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also I remember one in the early days of the debris, where they were, in the sports section, there's a image of a student with a blacksmithing hammer pounding on a boiler, in the football section. I had never found anywhere any reference that said that, there was, somebody, like when they win or when they'd make a touchdown or the band played, there was somebody pounding on a boiler in print, but
Okay.
there it is very clearly. So at for at least one game, or a season, there was a boiler present on the football field, probably at home games, where somebody was pounding on it. And that series of cartoons, like about a panel of 6 or 8 cartoons that you showed earlier. The first one, you can see the dormitory devils,
Mm-hmm.
and the tank scrap and a variety of other things. And I was trying to remember, it was one of those. It was, if it was Tarkington or George Age or who it was, is the one that was up there painting the class year on the tower. There, that actually is referenced in one of the student histories. I can't remember who it is, but I don't know, you'd have to check either John's book or my book to see. It's probably in there somewhere. But those cartoons are great. A lot of information in them.
They really are, David. And the other thing is that there's so many inside jokes.
Yes.
In the debris and the exponent. Even the descriptions that you see in the debris, they would write a 1 or 2 line description for every graduating senior. And most of the time it is some obscure reference that you can only surmise, basically guess at what it was. But again, inside jokes to that. But again, it gives you a perspective on it that we don't get today, with it. Looking back on it, we miss a lot of subtleties for that reason.
Pete, this is
Some of the most fun things at the debris were at the very end, where they kind of crack jokes about each other and make statements about one another, and it's pretty entertaining. Even if you don't know the people, which we don't, it's fun to read.
That's true. Joyce?
I think John referred to this earlier when he said the exponents and the debris are such a wealth of history. does it bother you and some of the rest of the historians on the call that with the absence of the debris in print and any other way now, who is capturing and how are we capturing life today? It's on Instagram and it's on Facebook and it's on, some of our social media. I've had conversation with Sammy Morris over this about it's an issue all across the country, not just in higher ed, but particularly we're focused on that now, trying to capture that. And what are we doing?
Well, I start to comment that the Exponent right now is doing a very good job of reporting. I'm very pleased with what the Exponent's doing right now. It's unfortunate they don't have print every day, but that's the reality of local newspapers today. I really think we missed the debris. You're right, there's a lot of history in that. I said you can go through and get a feel for what that year was like by looking through those debris, but financially it just couldn't, it couldn't continue. It wasn't supporting itself. I can tell you this story when the Journal and Courier cut back so much, and everything that's happened there. We've gone from when I left there 45 reporters. Now there's 5 or 6, and I was worried about all the archives at the paper itself, and what was going to happen to them when they moved out of that big building. I think they gave some things to the Historical Association, but to get to the point. What's happened with the local news lately and national news, it's gone digital. So, back, 40 years ago when I was working in the Journal and Courier, I could go and I could find paper file, find an envelope full of stories on a certain topic. I'd go look them up alphabetically. Now I can go online to newspaper.com and put in a word and find every time Joyce Miles' name comes up in the Journal and Courier, back to 1920, the story pops up, and I can go through each one of them. So, in fact, in this digital age, we actually have better access to information in the papers. The Journal and Courier, you can access back to 1920, which is when Henry Marshall combined the two papers, the Journal and the Courier. But you can't get anything before that. Before that, you have to go to the archives and go through the papers, and there's no indexing or anything. Unfortunately, the Exponent is not does not have this great digital filing going on, and that's something that needs to take place. But again, it's an expense.
Good point, Joyce. I think the answer to your question is that this won't happen organically, meaning it won't happen just because we have papers generated. We now have to take a concerted effort to consciously do it. You're right, Joyce. So for example, with this whole coronavirus sort of thing that's going on, at TCHA, we've decided that we need to actually consciously focus on documenting what's going on in our community so that we actually have a record with that. But it does take a conscious effort to do it. We can't just pick up things that are normally generated because they're not, as you pointed out, in hard copy.
Yeah, and it is a very difficult and very costly process to keep track of all the electronic media out there these days, and trying to archive those because the formats change and everything else. But it's not just that. I mean, the other day, for example, I tried to find an article from the Lafayette Leader. There are no archives for the Lafayette Leader. No. They're all gone. I mean, various people have pieces of it here and there, but a straight run, it doesn't exist. And that's a very important document of Tippecanoe County history that nobody bothered to save.
Yeah, that's true. A lot of great stories about people who were in the Leaders. The Leader was a very useful paper. Oh, we've lost letters too. People don't write letters, and it's so wonderful to go up to those archives and get a hold of a person's letters and start reading them. You learn a lot.
Absolutely. And
Pardon me?
diaries also.
Yeah.
Personal diaries that just give such insight. So the point is, folks, and again, collectively, everybody who's on the screen today, again, don't let the history slip away. If you've got grandparents, parents, cousins, whatever, make sure that you're getting these documented, because once people go, that's it, unless we have these things documented, and we just can't let history slip away. So I think we'll wrap it up there, Leslie, but thank you everybody for coming. Thank you very much for supporting TCHA. We really appreciate it. I think our next one is actually not going to be, we're going to take a hiatus here for the holidays. And I think our next one is actually in March, when we're going to have Cindy Eberts from Lafayette Urban Ministry. We'll be talking about Ray Uri and the story behind Ray, because we again, a member of our community that a lot of folks don't know about. So you'll be seeing some more information about that on our website and by email and other information from us. So that'll be in the spring, when it'll be much nicer, we hope. So, Leslie, anything you want to say to wrap up?
I don't think so, but other than just keep an eye on our social media and the membership emails and our website. There are 1 or 2 presenters who might do a Zoom in January or February, so we'll keep you up to date that way. And again, if you have any ideas for next year, please let me know.
Very good. Well, thank you, everybody. Have yourself a good day.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks.
We'll talk to you later.
Happy holidays.